Going beyond Honduras now to Latin America, to South America in particular, to the new book that you just wrote, which is very interesting, Fordlandia, The Rise and Fall of Henry Ford's Forgotten Jungle City. The book tells the story of Henry Ford, the richest man in the world in the 1920s, and his attempt to build a rubber plantation and a miniature Midwest factory town deep in the heart of the Brazilian Amazon. It's a fascinating look, and especially with the demise of the auto industry in the United States, looking at U.S. policy towards Latin America. Tell us, what was Fordlandia?
Well, Fordlandia was the centerpiece town of a land grant concession. 2.5 million acres. It was the size of a small American state, Connecticut or Delaware. Sometimes it was compared with Tennessee. And it was Ford's attempt to get control over latex. It was the roaring 1920s. He controlled every raw material. He owned every raw material that went into the making of a car except for rubber. And so he moved into the Amazon, he moved into Brazil, but it quickly became much more than that. And it's Henry Ford, and Henry Ford was quite an outsized historical figure. It became a bid to export Americana, to overlay Americana on Amazonia, and replicate a small Midwestern American town deep in the heart of the Amazon.
And Ford, of course, was legendary in those days because he was the first major capitalist who believed in paying his workers a decent wage in order for them to be able to make enough to buy the cars they were making. Could you talk about his labor policies and how that got transferred when he established himself in Brazil? Yeah,
Ford was the famous Fordism, the principle that if you pay workers $5 a day, and it will allow them to buy the products that they make and thus expand the market. So profit was actually dependent on high wages. That was the idea, and for a long time this was the centerpiece of U.S. capitalism, and also, of course, his revolutionary assembly line process, which breaks the production process down to its simplest component. That all happens in the early 1910s, but by the 1920s, when he establishes Fordlandia, Ford is still being celebrated as the man who democratizes capitalism, but in reality, on the shop floor, he becomes to rely on quite a brutal program of anti-unionism. He relies on this thug Harry Bennett to enforce shop floor discipline with that one historian compared to a totalitarian state. And so in many ways, Fordlandia is Ford's attempt to recapture a lost innocence, or this mantle of being history's redeemer. Ford revolutionizes capitalism, but then he spends most of the rest of his life trying to put the genie back into the bottle. In some ways, you could think of him as the sorcerer's apprentice. He attempts any number of experiments at social reform in the United States. He sets up these small, what he calls village industries in northern Michigan that tries to balance agriculture and industry. Now, these were no match to the raw power of industrial capitalism, and he increasingly becomes idiosyncratic and quirky in his social vision. And Fordlandia, in many ways, is the kind of terminus of a lifetime of quite idiosyncratic ideas of how to organize society.
And he was into not only controlling the workers on the shop floor, but also their lives in general, wasn't he? He had his employees surveilled, they watched what they were doing, how they were enjoying themselves. And did he carry that over into Brazil as well? Yeah, it was a combination of intense paternalism and intense surveillance, with the surveillance half increasing as the paternalist part fails in the United States. In Brazil, it was a program of social regulation. He exported prohibition. He didn't like drinking, even though it wasn't a Brazilian law. He tried to regulate the diet of Brazilian workers. He had he was a health food nut, so he had them eating whole rice and whole wheat bread and canned Michigan peaches and oatmeal. He also tried to regulate their recreational time. He introduced square dancing to replace the samba. Ford was a big proponent of old-time American dance. He didn't like modern dance. He didn't like jazz. He thought jazz was too sensual and too corrupting. So in the United States, he was rescuing polkas and waltzes and square dances, and he did the same in Brazil.
I want to play an old clip about Fordlandia. This is from a 1944 U.S.-produced documentary called The Amazon Awakens. It was made by Walt Disney, but commissioned by the U.S. Coordinator of Inter-American Affairs.
Among the present-day pioneers of the Amazon who are lighting the way for others to follow is Henry Ford. Ford's rubber development on the Tapajos River is an enterprise of historic proportion. Here, 2 million acres of jungle are being converted into a highly modernized plantation, capable of producing rubber on a large scale. Deep in the wilderness, this model community is self-sufficient in every detail. It has its own powerhouse.